The iron door slams. Hair falls onto wet stone. A red-hot brand hisses as a name is burned off the body, and somewhere below, an oubliette opens like a mouth. If you were dropped into the forgotten place, how long would your identity survive the dark, which is deadlier in a medieval prison, hunger, iron, or the gaze of an entire town? Imagine being dragged through iron doors, the torchlit corridor booming with the cries of the condemned. For women in medieval Europe, this was not legend, but the opening scene of incarceration. Crossing the threshold of a gaol in England or a geol in France meant stepping into a machine that stripped identity at once. The first ritual was the razor, hair shorn close to the scalp, not just to fight lice, but to crack dignity. In a world where a woman's hair signaled modesty, status, even marital standing, the sudden cold on bare skin felt like a sentence already passed. Strands slid across damp stone, and with them went the social protections those strands once announced. Then came iron. Bilbo's locked ankles together, heavy cuffs worried the wrists, and chains fixed bodies to rings sunk in walls. These were not purpose-built prisons, but surplus spaces, castle cells, monastery undercrofts, municipal basements with damp breath in every corner. Women slept within earshot of thieves, debtors, and prisoners awaiting execution because separate facilities were rare before the 15th century. The air mixed mold, smoke, and human fear. The floor learned every footprint and forgot every name. Even innocence did not loosen chains, because accusation alone could place a body in irons and keep it there until coin, luck, or death intervened. Let them be confined and abased, declared the jurist Ulrich Tengler in Der Lionspiegel, 1509, a legal manual that echoed through the Holy Roman Empire. His instruction reveals the goal, not correction, but submission. The shaved head signaled defeat, the shackles rehearsed obedience, and the open display taught the crowd how disobedience would look when it lost. The opening ritual did not only cut hair, it sliced personhood thin, turning a woman into an example the moment she crossed the gate. Erasure worked as a function, not an accident. A skull under stubble served as a walking verdict. A chain became a sermon in iron. The cell tutored the inmate in compliance, while the street learned to police its own with glances and whispers. On this stage, secular power directed, religious authority provided the script, and bystanders completed the cast with their judgments and jeers. The lesson was simple enough for any child to read. Step out of line, and your body will become the board on which the law writes. Starvation cells. The forgotten corner of the dungeon. Not every penalty cracked whips or turned wheels. Some worked like a long winter, slow, total, and final. Beneath the main wards hid hunger chambers, spaces tight as coffins, blind as pits, cold as old water. No bedding, no light, no schedule, only time and a door that would not open. In 14th century France, the oubliette, literally the forgotten place, became the name people whispered for such shafts. Women were lowered through a trapdoor and left in vertical hollows carved into bedrock, as at Loches or under the Bastille. Official labels called it close ward. In practice, the delivery of food and water simply stopped. Prison records from England speak of suspects in moral offenses or witchcraft kept in close ward, without bread or water for days, a phrase that lets the ink stay clean while the body fails. In these places, the calendar vanished. Day and night were only temperatures. The world above continued to trade and pray, while the stone below learned a life by the sound of slow breathing. Deprivation was the plan, decay the method. Watch now what the dark did to flesh and thought when time itself put on the hood of the executioner. Suffering accelerated in airless holes. Without sanitation or warmth, even strong bodies buckled. Lice explored every seam, sores opened and refused to close. Skin carried the grit of the floor, nails turned black, cramps crawled through muscles that had nowhere to stretch. Death approached on three paths that braided tight dehydration, starvation, infection, while the mind arrived at the edge first. Voices rose, cracked, and tapered to a rasp. Hallucinations painted the walls with bands of false sunlight. Memory thinned until a name felt like a heavy object the tongue could no longer lift. Many endings never touched a ledger. Accounts omit food that never arrived, and omit people whose exit required no ceremony. At a gray hour, guards hauled a body up by rope, dragged it past a door that did not look up, and took it to unmarked earth beyond the wall. No bell, no psalm, just the scrape of a spade smoothing the shape back into the ground. The starvation cell was not a verdict in words. It was a disappearance arranged by plumbing. Punishment became absence, and absence did the work of fear more cheaply than any scaffold could. The pit made a person invisible. Branding did the opposite, turning flesh into a permanent notice posted to the public square. Branded for sin, punishment for immorality, behind bars. In medieval Europe, crime braided itself to sin, and the line between them often narrowed to the width of a rumor. A woman accused of adultery, night-walking, or disorderly living could feel civic and ecclesiastical justice fall together like two doors closing. Once convicted, many carried their sentence for life because the court wrote it on the body. A heating brazier, an iron shaped like a letter or device, and one deliberate press produced a judgment that no rain could wash away. Branding, sanctioned in parts of Europe by the later Middle Ages, burned, meaning where everyone could read it. In England, marks long reserved for thieves and habitual offenders crept toward vice crimes by the 15th century. Later statutes branded vagrants and those called nightwalkers, letters raised in blister and scar across upper arms or chests. The hiss, the smell of fat, the short scream, these were the sound effects the crowd learned to hear as moral instruction. Once the iron lifted, it left a sign that could be seen from across a market and felt under the quietest blouse. Court rolls from London and York record women punished for common misconduct or living without governance, alongside notes of irons that bit and signs that shamed. North, across the border. A 1424 Scottish Act allowed repeat offenders women labeled idle or unmannerly to be marked with iron. In the next century, Bridewell in London converted to a house of correction, whipped and exposed those accused of prostitution. Some were branded, even when the exact symbol went unscribed. Legal writers praised the lesson of sight. "The correction of sin is visible to all," ran the approving line, capturing a strategy that turned anatomy into a notice board. The city became a classroom where punishment taught by looking. Children learned an alphabet of scars. Adults read a biography from a single letter. The brand followed a woman into church porches, into stalls where she bargained for fish, into kitchens where employers weighed her worth like meat. It met the eyes of neighbors before a word left her mouth and told them what to think in a grammar of burn and ridge. Vision did the policing long after the guards had gone to bed. Yet the brand did more than sting. It revised the future at every door. See now how one small mark could fold a life's horizon into a narrow lane with no turnings. Branding was uneven across regions but devastating wherever used. A marked woman stepped back into the world, already shortened by judgment. Employers saw the letter first and the person later, if ever. Landlords measured rent against scandal. Hawkers and porters decided with their eyes whether to serve or scorn. Gossip grew a spine the instant the shirt slipped and revealed a curve of raised scar. Each errand became a negotiation with a past that could not be hidden because it glowed on the skin whenever a sleeve rode up. Punishment repeated itself in two acts. Fire delivered pain at once. The second act unfolded over years, as social life withheld invitations, protections, and pay. Marriage prospects soured. Guilds refused. Parish alms grew cooler. The brand acted as a portable sentence that traveled through markets and seasons, speaking on a woman's behalf even when she chose silence. It said, "Here stands a lesson. Treat her as the law already has." In that way, the iron multiplied itself without ever touching the brazier again. If branding pinned blame to the skin, interrogation pinned it to the record often before any judge had spoken. Step into the chamber where pain was renamed procedure and the outcome was written in advance. Witch trials behind bars, torture before the verdict. Long before flames or gallows, the cell tightened its hold on women accused of witchcraft. After the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum in 1487, a manual that painted women as easily deceived and dangerously persuasive, torture became a method rather than a scandal. Under Roman law and canon law, pain was permitted when suspicion was strong, a phrase that stretched as far as panic required. Inside stone rooms, ropes and frames waited like a set of instruments laid out for a dark music. The strappado-bound arms behind the back hoisted the body high, then let it drop short, tearing at shoulders that rarely healed right again. Thumbscrews crushed small bones into chalky heat. The boot drove wedges between leg and board until splinters sang. The rack extended a person until joints suggested secrets they did not hold. Language softened the edges by calling this the question, but the body did not mistake its grammar. All of this could be applied while the accused was still presumed innocent, a fiction that survived in writing longer than it did in rooms that smelled of rope, fiber, and fear. Confessions were not simply allowed, they were expected, and gaps were treated as stubbornness hurt into compliance. Under agony, women gave names to satisfy the demand for a network. Neighbors, rivals, midwives, anyone the interrogator's eyebrow suggested. The first confession required a second to sound plausible, and the second required a third. The process scaled itself like ivy up a wall. House after house learned the feel of a knock given by men who called themselves servants of order but smelled of smoke and sweat. Towns fell into spirals that ground trust into powder. Würzburg in the early 17th century, slightly after the medieval frame, saw over 100 women executed as chains of coerced testimony tightened. The example shows how a method can outlive the century that birthed it. Files swelled with statements made under duress, then cited one another like mirrors that face each other across a room. By the time a verdict arrived, the story had already been carved into a body too damaged to stand straight, let alone argue. Suspicion had replaced proof, and fear had replaced judgment. In such trials, justice wore ritual like armor and used pain as a pen. Torture was not a sentence after judgment. It was the workshop where the preferred tale was made to fit the facts. Starvation shrank resistance, branding rehearsed shame, and pre-trial interrogation produced documents that looked sturdy because they were thick, not because they were true. Prisons became factories for disgrace, and disgrace moved through streets faster than any cart could roll. The result bent legal codes toward fear and set habits that reinforced the quiet rule of men over women in matters of body, voice, and movement. The corridor of history runs long, but its lesson is brief. Systems reveal their values by what they choose to destroy. Here, authorities claim to guard order while shaving heads, chaining ankles, starving dissent, burning letters into skin, and wringing testimony from joints. Those methods told the real story. Control first, correction last. Echoes carry forward whenever morality becomes a badge that lets power lay hands on a body. The work now is to notice the pattern before a new door slams, to hear the old hinges in the sound, and to decide together that no one's flesh should be asked to carry the law again. Your reflections bridge past to present. If the next step is vigilance, the path begins with naming patterns out loud, while the lights are still on and the doors are still open.